what kind of sensory needs does my child have? I remember when we visited last time, we touched a bit on sensory and how that's something we don't usually hear about as parents until your world's been affected by it. And that's what happened to me. I had a child that would rarely hug me, didn't want me to hug him, didn't really want touched, would lose his mind if a sibling came up and bumped him or picked him up and jostled him in any way that he wasn't expecting. And what we learned is that he had some real sensory sensitivities related to both touch and proprioception.
Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a repeat special guest today. Jami, your last name is?
Kirkbride.
Say it again, I didn't catch it.
Kirkbride.
Kirkbride.
That's
Jami
right.
Kirkbride, welcome back to Imperfect Momming.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
So tell us again who you are and what you do.
You bet. My name is Jami Kirkbride, and I work with parenting with personality. And that was actually a business that I started when I really wanted to spend time educating parents about the personality of their kids, because I felt like it was just such an integral piece to understanding our children. And then it would just so have it in the course of parenting 7 kids of our own that we had some that were actually neurodiverse, and one especially that had some significant mental health issues. And while I loved using all of the personality tools, we needed a little bit more. And so we really had to kind of figure out some issues with anxiety and depression and mental health, ADHD, mood disorders. And it took us down this really complicated path that I discovered didn't have a lot of support. So with a background as a counselor and a background mothering 7 children and having one of those kiddos that has the invisible disabilities, we learned a lot. And my passion now is to help educate other parents who are raising children who are maybe highly sensitive, maybe they're emotionally intense, maybe they're exhibiting challenging behaviors. But I really want to come alongside those parents, and through my Calm Connection parenting program, offer them some strategies and support and free resources so that they can get the support that they need to help their children. Kind of a shortcut through some of the things that we had to learn by trial and error.
I think that's really beautiful. I love when people take their struggles and smooth the path a little bit for the people behind them. And the whole time you were talking, I'm like, and where's your book?
I actually had written a children's personality assessment when I was in the personality part of it. So I actually have a book. It's called The Yuzu, and that actually is a parenting resource and kind of helps figure out your child's personality. But I really, really want the time to do part 2 and get into all of this stuff. I actually sunk a lot of my time, effort, and energy into doing a video course. And that's what I've used over the course of this last year to just walk alongside some of these families that are feeling the heartbreak of a child that maybe they can't connect with, or that is experiencing these really big emotions and they don't know how to relate and they don't know how to understand their child's wiring. And so I hope I can get the book done too, but I started with the program because it allows me to just really pour into their daily struggles, their specific routines that trip them up, and to, help them figure out, how do we understand our child, but then how do we help others understand our child, and how do we advocate for our child's needs? And so that's where I have really moved a lot of my passion, and feel like there's a strong purpose in encouraging and educating parents in that way.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about it is that it could help every parent, not just parents of neurodivergent,
That's right.
because my son, God bless him, is going through puberty at the moment.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
he's experiencing some strong emotions. And sometimes, because I'm the safe space, I get the brunt of those really strong
Right.
emotions. And I'm just so glad that I've done the work that I've done, or I would be creating similar damage to
That's
what I
right.
experienced.
No, and that's one of the things that I love most about these strategies and this approach that I've come up with, is that so many times you find a parenting program that works for just, neurotypical brains or just neurodivergent. And this works beautifully with both, because it's centered on validating, it's centered on connecting, it's centered on co-regulating. And we find that when we do our work as parents, we parent differently. And so it's really important, if we're going to help our kids, that we figure out what are some of our own triggers. What do we need to work through so that we can help them? And sometimes that's the first step.
Mm-hmm. I mean, which remind me which personality
System.
thank you.
Right. I learned under the Wired That Way. It's the lit hour system. And they basically have like the powerful, the playful, the proper, and the peaceful. And when you know those, you know that certain personalities are more comfortable showing big emotions. So you may have a powerful choleric child that they experience big emotions simply because it's a part of their personality. Or you may have a child who maybe is a playful, but when things aren't going right and they're overwhelmed, they tend to express big emotions. You may have a child who likes, things the proper way, and they're very much about the details. And when things don't go according to detail or according to plan, then that may induce a different kind of big emotion. And believe it or not, even a peaceful child is expressing big emotions when they shut down. Even though it's not loud and proud, it's still a pretty big emotion, because they shut down when they get just overwhelmed. And so I think it's important as parents that we look not just for the loud and proud behaviors, but that we also look for those quiet ones, because honestly, they can be just as harmful or damaging or destructive to a child or a relationship or even a family. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I just really have a heart to help parents learn to see what's behind the behavior.
Yeah, I love that that's what's happening now in parenting, more so than when we were growing up, where it was like the thing that I've been saying lately on podcasts is like, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Like everybody over the age of 35 has heard that phrase. And it's like, well, how is that helpful? I'm already crying.
Right.
That would not make me not cry. Like,
and
I think cry more.
That's so true. And I think so many of the parenting strategies of the past revolved around fear-based. We wanted them to fear what would happen if they didn't do it, so they better do it. Or we want them to fear the consequence or the punishment. And that's not how you parent and nurture a child's heart. I had a military dad in my coaching program, and it was so interesting because he was very clear that he wanted his kids to respect him. And I said, I get that. I agree. Let me ask you this. What do you want your relationship with your child to look like 10 years from now? Do you want them to be afraid of you? Do you want them to feel open and that they can talk with you? Do you want to feel like you have a healthy, loving relationship? And he said, well, of course I want a healthy, loving relationship. And I said, well, what would you do then if I told you that the strategies you're using to get them to respect you aren't going to lead you there? And it really caught his attention, because the methods he was using were fear-based, and it was going to create more damage to their relationship and their connection than anything else.
And there's a huge difference between respect and fear.
That's right.
Like, you can respect somebody and not fear them,
Right.
and I would even argue that you can't really respect someone that you fear,
Yeah, if
you
it's
know?
right, if it's an emotion of, if it's like the admire, like I fear them and their capacity as a leader, that's one thing. But if you're
Mhm,
fearing because it's a worry, it's a, oh no, what will happen, or I don't know what to expect. And for so many kids, if we're dealing with them in any way that sets off that fear emotion, their brains kick in and they feel threat. And for a lot of kiddos, whether they're neurotypical and especially neurodivergent, many of their brains get stuck on threat anyway.
mm,
And so when their brains get stuck on threat, we're dealing with a child that all of a sudden we've become a trigger. Not
mhm,
only are we in their environment and we can't help them calm, we are probably likely causing them to inflate more, to erupt more, because we've
yeah,
become the trigger rather than the calming force. And so I think that's why it's so important that we look at personality, that we look at, what kind of sensory needs does my child have? I remember when we visited last time, we touched a bit on sensory and how that's something we don't usually hear about as parents until your world's been affected by it. And
mhm,
that's what happened to me. I had a child that would rarely hug me,
mm,
didn't want me to hug him, didn't really want touched, would lose his mind if a sibling came up and bumped him or picked him up and jostled him in any way that he wasn't expecting. And what we learned is that he had some real sensory sensitivities related to both touch and proprioception, and
mm,
kind of where his body was in space. And what we learned is that as we addressed his needs, his body could settle down, his brain could settle down. And I will never forget the day he initiated a hug.
mm,
Now, if we hadn't taken the time to understand the overwhelm that his body was feeling, if we hadn't kind of flexed some of the things that we were doing when we worked with him, we may have just constantly exacerbated that sensitivity. And he may have just continued dreading touch or resisting touch or pulling away. And instead, he is now a 13-year-old boy that oftentimes will come up and throw his arms around me and just hold me in a real tight hug, longer than I would even expect. And that's a miracle to me that through understanding some of those tiny pieces of sensory, we unlocked a piece of our relationship that could have been stuck forever.
yeah. I I find it's so fascinating the way that, and that's just I have to acknowledge that that's a beautiful,
No,
beautiful
thank
story.
you.
So, and congratulations, because I know that it would be heart-wrenching if
Oh
to
my
have
God.
a child not want to hug you.
Oh,
Um, and I find it very fascinating how sensory things are different for different kids, because my
mhm.
son's sensory thing is like he does not like tags on his shirts, and he used to always call different pants comfy pants or not
Right.
comfy pants, and I thought that just all sweatpants were comfy pants and all jeans were not. And and but what it ended up being was that, you know how on pants they have the elastic with the
Oh,
button for
yes.
kids
Oh,
that have longer legs and shorter, skinnier waists? That was what he was calling non-comfy
not
pants, because the
right.
button was rubbing on his hip or wherever it was rubbing. So he just
Anything
stopped.
extra can be
Yeah,
something so annoying that to
yeah.
them really sets them off all day long. And it may take a child like that all day just to manage his frustration of those
Mm,
pants that aren't comfy, that
yeah.
he doesn't have the tolerance for a peer that tries to pick a fight, or a
Mm,
teacher that makes him redo a paper, or that he has to erase and start over and his paper tears. Those
yeah,
kind of things are extra and above and beyond when he's already trying to hold it together because
yeah.
of this silly waistband in my
Mm.
pants.
Yeah. And but he loves hugs. Like,
Oh,
that's
good.
his love language. That's it's like,
Yeah.
so I was like, so it's interesting that they have the sensory thing. Now, am I
Mm.
remembering that you had the child that doesn't always sit at the table with you because
Yes.
sometimes other children have
You're right. If somebody doesn't put on deodorant, or they chew loudly, or they're eating something he doesn't like the smell of, we had to learn that kind of flexibility. You know, in our family, I felt like we kind of had our own little study group, and everybody did it the same. You know, we all pulled up to the table, we all ate everything on our plate, and then when we were finished, we were excused, and every mealtime was a battle with him. And what we really had to learn was that there was validity in the fact that his system was totally overwhelmed, whether it was the temperature of the food, the taste of the food, the texture of the food, the smell of people sitting near him. And we had to get where we would just say, you know what, if this is a meal where you need to sit, you know, up at the bar or by yourself, we're okay with that. And the more we became okay with that, the less he needed that. And I think what that speaks to is that we're teaching our kids how to, number one, be flexible, because I had to model what that flexibility looked like. But we also had to model that when it's a day where you're just kind of spent, you have to respectfully ask for what you need. Yeah. So if he knew he could say to me, can I sit at the bar? That was my cue. This is one of those days. And I might respond with, you know, is it just kind of been a tough day? Yeah, I just need to sit here. Okay, no more questions asked. Instead of pushing, nope, we're all going to sit at the table. No, this is the way we do it. Because sometimes we have some pretty rigid ideas about what family routines or traditions should look like and feel like. And I learned that I had to be far more flexible if he was going to be able to model the same flexibility in return. It's a different kind of co-regulating.
Yeah. And I learned working with a parent educator about, hey, that's not your food. We have a 4-year-old cat, and he is eating the kitten's food, and this is not okay. Because the kitten can't get to eat food. Sorry, mom life.
That's right. Keeping it real.
Anyway, I just hear crunch, crunch, crunch. I was like, wait, you're not supposed to be doing that. And he's not listening, so that's absolutely right. Mom life. Anyway, my favorite tool that I learned was about natural consequences, because I think that we, you know, a consequence of not getting dressed and up and ready to go to school in time is, you know, now you're grounded, right? Which doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the
infraction.
Right? What are you learning exactly? And so my son, now we've, you know, implemented that he's not allowed any technology until he has his hair and teeth brushed and his clothes are on and his shoes are on. He is ready to walk out the door. So no electronics until then. Can I tell you, he got up at 7 by himself without an alarm clock today?
Yeah, you found currency.
Ever. Right?
Electronics are good currency.
A couple of days ago, I was running a little behind, and he's like, Mom, get out the door. Let's get out the door. Let's get out the door. And I'm like, since when are you rushing me out the door? It's usually the other way around. He goes, because I don't want you to drop me off at the crosswalk. I want you to take me to the close place. Because I have a place I have to be at 8:30. He gets dropped off. If he's not dropped off by 8:05, he gets dropped off farther away. Yeah. And he has to walk. And so he pushed me to get there. And I was like, I love that natural consequence thing. Awesome.
It works both ways.
And it teaches them real life. It doesn't, like, I mean, in real life, I guess if you're late to work, you might get fired. But that's a natural consequence. So we want to be not late to work. We want to be not late to school. And, you know, but your boss isn't going to say, okay, now you're grounded.
Right.
They're probably also not going to say, like, now your pay's deducted. Like, those things don't happen. It's like, now you're fired. Like, that's
Right.
the natural consequence of you being late,
Right.
So, which I have a trigger around being late because of my high school teacher who I was late every single day to first period because it took like 6 minutes to run from where the bus dropped me off to first period, and there was 4 minutes to get there. So 6 minutes running, like there was nothing else I could do. I couldn't get there faster.
Right. Oh
And so
man.
I wasn't like I got a bad grade in the class and I had to have detention. So I'm like, I am
Right.
extra on
Yeah.
time all the time.
Yeah. Well, getting up and out of your house is kind of crunch time. And
Right.
I'd say that is one of the times in a day where many families experience these meltdowns. Well, every time we're trying to get out the door, we have a meltdown. And there's a reason for that. And sometimes it's the stress we bring to that time of day,
Mhm.
where even just small things, especially for kiddos who struggle with being on time themselves, setting things out ahead of time, or maybe giving yourself 5 or 10 more minutes. I mean, I know sometimes I'm the one that's guilty of
Mhm.
working and taking as long as I absolutely have to get myself ready. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that's a minute. Now I got to get everybody to the car. And what I bring to the situation is an intensity, it's a stress, it's a pressure. And for kiddos who are highly sensitive, they take that on and it grows inside of them. And then that's when they can't manage that kind of emotion and they
Yeah.
feel the overwhelm and they blow. And so
Yeah.
sometimes, us being aware of those kind of things, what is their currency? What does get them moving? What gets us moving? And really planning, what should our mornings look like? What does it look like when we need to get out of the house? Is there anything we could do ahead of time to make sure it goes smoothly? Like, we do better if we just don't turn the TV on until everybody's ready. Because
Mhm.
if one person's ready and then someone's watching, guess what? It's a major distraction for anybody else that isn't ready.
And now with 7 kids, you got the older ones helping the younger ones get ready, and then you can take as long as you want and say, "Okay, we got 1 minute, let's go to the
You
car."
would think it would work that way, right?
You would. In the perfect world of magical fairies and
That's right. No, actually, the reality of it is everybody thinks somebody else is doing it. So I hate to admit this, but we actually showed up to a wedding one time with our neurodivergent child without shoes.
Oh,
And we looked at him and we said, "What do you mean you have no shoes? Like, why don't you have shoes on?" He said, "You didn't tell me to put my shoes on." I said, "Well, did we tell you to go to the car?" "Yeah." "Well, have you ever gone to the car without shoes on?" Kiddos who are sensitive, kiddos who are already operating out of overwhelm, kiddos who don't do well with unexpecteds, kids whose crunch time is when you're transitioning into the car, traveling, whatever, they can become very literal. So if you don't say to him, grab your book bag, grab your coat, did you brush your teeth? It may not happen. And so we're working on ways that he can be self-reminded, but they're very literal sometimes. And so if you don't look at them and say, put your shoes on, they may walk out the door with no shoes. And if 7 other people don't notice, you're making a mad dash for Walmart.
does you're speaking my language. But does he have a list of what he's supposed to do before he can get into the car?
No, it would help him, but the list would be a trigger to him. And
Okay.
so what we actually have, I have a clock. And so when we get ready in the morning, the first 10 minutes have a visual picture for what happens that 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's eating and getting dressed. So we have food and clothes. Then, the next 10 minutes have brushing teeth and the squirt bottle because it shows him what he needs to do the next step. And then
Yeah.
last, we would have the bus because he's supposed to be watching for the bus. So we do a visual reminder because the list
The
would
list is
serve as a
tricky.
trigger to him, largely because of his demand avoidance. Now, other kids function beautifully with the list.
Right.
Some personalities prefer the list.
Mhm.
How
Yeah,
does your son do with lists?
um, it's a good question because we've written a list in marker, and he liked the idea of it. I don't know that he's ever looked at it.
Mhm.
It I was the list for a long time. And so ever since we've kind of implemented the no electronics until you're dressed rule.
Mm.
He'll come to me. He's been doing it on his own, and he'll come to me and he says, "Am I ready?"
Yeah.
And I'll go through the list with him verbally: hair, teeth, clothes, shoes. Okay, you're good. Oh,
Right.
breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Um,
great.
yeah. So, and he's not always hungry when he first wakes up. So this morning he did all of the things without me.
Yeah.
I think the cat woke him up. The kitten woke him up. So I'm going to lock the kitten in his bedroom at night from now on.
Right.
That was amazing to not have to wake him up. But he hates the alarm. So it's like and now in all fairness, it's a cat screaming. I don't know where it came from, but if I could change it, I would. So we don't use that. But I mean, mornings are fun. So this morning he wasn't hungry, and he's like, he did just want to get onto the computer. And I said, you know what? 20 minutes, go on, you can have the computer. Then at the 20-minute mark, you need to eat your breakfast. And breakfast is without the electronics too, because he'll just sit there and he'll just scroll and not eat, you know.
Their focus becomes just the electronic. We used something similar when for every increment in the morning, he earned 5 minutes of tech time when he got home from school.
Okay.
So, making it to the breakfast table dressed at 6:10, then he earned his first 5 minutes. Having his teeth brushed by 6:20, he earned the next 5 minutes. Being ready and watching for the bus by 6:30, he earned his next 15 minutes. And that worked well for him as well.
Yeah.
So kind of just finding what are those systems that aren't overwhelming to them, but that serve as that healthy motivation, and that they kind of fit real world. These are like your company benefits.
Yeah, for sure. So is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms?
Oh, absolutely. I love the reminder that all behavior is communication. And not every behavior we see is disrespect or defiance. Yeah. And I think those two go hand in hand beautifully, because I think, especially for those of us who kind of had heavier handed parenting, a lot of it was just assumed that it was an attitude problem or a behavior problem. And I think it's really important that we pause and we make sure that we're gathering the information that we need, because oftentimes our child is really communicating a need rather than disrespect or defiance. And so I think just reminding ourselves to look what's behind the behavior that we're seeing. I think that's really been key for me as a mom.
Yeah. Yeah. And my son was a direct communicator. I don't know if you're familiar with direct and indirect communication. And I'm an indirect communicator. I was raised by indirect communicators. So I try really, really hard to be a direct communicator, and it just comes out indirect a lot of times. But I unfortunately, he's picked up on my direct communication. So when he was upset yesterday, I was like, what is it that you need? Do you need help? Yeah. And he's like, of course I need help. Like, you can see I'm upset. Of course I need help. And I was like, well, I'm waiting for you to ask me.
Yeah.
You're the indirect communicator. I was like, come on. Okay.
You're teaching him well. He's using it all on you now.
Right.
I love those moments to just say, hey, then let's rewind this and let's try again. And this time I want you to ask me for what it is that you need. And slowly our kiddo is learning what that sounds like, because at first his answers may be like, are you kidding me? Why do I, oh, wait a minute. You sound very upset. Like you didn't like that idea. Well, no, I don't like, okay, then just rewind. Let's try again. And this time ask for what it is that you want to happen instead. And when they learn that you're willing to do that, they're willing to walk it back without erupting. But it takes the practice and it takes building the trust. And, we approach them so differently when what we assume is disrespect or defiance than if we know our child is asking for help, right? And so I just think it's really important that we kind of preface how we work with their behavior as they're likely communicating a need. let's figure out what it is.
And that will shift your parenting more than anything else if you look at their behaviors as communication and not as defiance or like that is so gold. Is there another book? Because I don't remember what you recommended last time, but is there a book?
I always have good books. Last time it was on sensory. This time I wanted to mention The Brain Body Parenting. And it was truly a wonderful book that really helped me grasp how the brain was working and ways that I needed to be more flexible to understand how his brain was working. And I think it really changed the way that I approach mothering. So I encourage anybody to check that one out.
I have a feeling that the book that you recommended last time that I downloaded it. What was the name of it?
Sensory Processing 101.
Okay, maybe not. But there was one that I downloaded that was, anyway.
There's so many good ones. Those are my favorites.
He's here now. He's saying hi, non-verbally.
Very good.
I am recording. So is there, where can our listeners find you?
You bet. You can find me at parentingwithpersonality.com. And I'm also on Facebook. We have a support group, Parenting with Personality, as well as on Instagram. And we're actually having a free workshop October 2nd. And it's called Bold Emotions, Big Hearts, Understanding and Advocating for Your Uniquely Wired Child. And I would just invite any of you that would like to check that out to come and register for that. That's at calmconnectionparent.com/workshop. And it's a free workshop. I would welcome you to come and attend.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Like, unmute. And I was like, she's talking.
Your handsome helper.
Yes, he's we've talked about doing a podcast together.
Maybe you should.
We haven't done it yet.
It looks like he might enjoy it.
I think so. So thank you for coming back and for the wealth of knowledge that you are. And I look forward to your hearing more about your course and your free event that's next week and or this week, depending on when you're listening to it.
That's right. October 2nd at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time.
Awesome. So there will be another episode of Imperfect Momming for you all coming next week. And until we meet again, keep healing.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
It looks blue, but it's purple.
Mm-hmm.